I can't think of a movie in my lifetime that has been given so many different responsibilities as Black Panther: Wakanda Forever has. I mean, when you ultimately think about it, this is, I think, like the 30th movie now in the most successful film franchise of all time. So it has to, keep in line with what's come before it. It also has to, as all Marvel movies do, set up properties to come, which it does, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But ultimately, this movie had to serve as a tribute to Chadwick Boseman and to honor his legacy. And I think to varying degrees, this film accomplished all of those tasks and others, which ultimately contributed to a really enjoyable movie for me. As is with the case with the MCU at this point, they're always announcing and always working on future projects. And so you'll see characters pop up in films that are already set to have their own shows or movies coming out in a little bit. So there is one character that is introduced in this film. She is in the trailer, but not a whole lot, and her name is never said. So I won't give too many details away, but she does have her own Disney Plus show coming out pretty soon. And I will say that I really enjoyed this character in this movie. She's played with a lot of charisma and energy, and she's a very likable character, and she doesn't feel shoehorned into the movie. She, her story fits with what's happening in the film. She is integral to the plot of the film. It just doesn't feel like she's there and then she's just going to go off and have her show. She is really important to the plot of this movie. So again, I felt like this character's introduction was well done, and I'm excited to see her show down the road. The other character that is introduced in this film is the villain, quote unquote villain. They call him two different names in the film. It's pronounced both Namor and Namor. So I'm going to, I guess, just use whichever one I feel more comfortable with at the time. And so you have with this character the main antagonist of this film, but anyone who's familiar with Marvel characters and Marvel comics from the past will know that this character is somewhat of like an anti-hero. I'm not too familiar with the character, but I have done a little bit of research. So obviously he's the villain of this movie, but it stands to reason that they're going to keep him around for a little bit. He's going to be to some degree important to the MCU going forward. So with that being said, they do have to explain some of his backstory in this film. They have to make him somewhat of a sympathetic character, even though he is, again, technically the villain of this movie. They do need to give him enough backstory and enough empathy that the audience doesn't completely hate him, and that down the line, if he eventually decides to like join the Avengers or whatever, we need to not only know enough about the character, but have some sort of fondness towards his character. And I think they walk that line very finely here. They give his backstory kind of in like an exposition dump in the middle that is accompanied with other things. Again, I'm not going to go too much into spoilers, but that is one section of the film that I thought was a little bit bogged down. If I have any complaints about this movie, I thought that when they focus kind of on Namor and his backstory and like his sort of side of the film slowed down a little bit. Not that it wasn't enjoyable, like it's important stuff to know and it's good stuff to know going forward, but I did feel like that part of the film kind of like dragged a little bit. Maybe they could have cut a little bit. This movie is like 2 hours and 45 minutes. So if I had any complaint, I felt like in the middle of the movie, they could have maybe cut down on the Namor aspect a little bit. Could they have just given him his own movie? Possibly. I don't hate what they did with his character here, but I enjoyed the actor that played him. This is apparently his first American movie, his first English film. So I thought he did great, considering that. And I liked his character in general, but if I had any sort of criticism of the film, it would be that part in the middle got kind of bogged down. But in terms of like setting things up for the future of the MCU, that's one of the responsibilities this film was tasked with, as all Marvel movies and TV shows are, and I thought that this film handled it very well. I do just want to talk a little bit about the production side of the film, so like the directing and then also the visual effects. So Ryan Coogler, the director and like main writer of this film, was put in a very difficult position. From what I've read, he had written most of the script for Black Panther 2 before Chadwick Boseman passed away, which left him and Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios in a really tricky spot, because there are a couple different ways you can proceed. It is not uncommon practice in Hollywood to just recast characters and just kind of have it be the same character but a different actor. That has worked well in the past. If you look at Dumbledore in the Harry Potter franchise, they switch actors after like the second film. But anyone who's watched those movies looks fondly on both actors who have played Dumbledore. You can also go the Star Wars route, and even like the Fast and Furious route. We do have the technology where you can probably just, augment the actor into the film. Those movies are a little bit different, where Paul Walker and Carrie Fisher had already filmed some of their scenes for those films, so they just use kind of like extra footage and past footage to finish up their roles. But when you have, in this instance, a character who is so synonymous with the actor, I don't think that Marvel Studios and Ryan Coogler could have got away with doing any of those options. I really don't think audiences would have stood for it with how beloved Chadwick Boseman was for this character. So that left them in the spot where they basically had to rewrite the whole film and just shoot it and write off his character. And I don't think that they could have done any better of a job. I don't think that Ryan Coogler I don't think anyone could have executed better than Ryan Coogler did from a writing standpoint, and from a directing standpoint. So just to talk about that a little bit. I did have some pretty significant issues with the first Black Panther. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you know that the first Black Panther is pretty low on my MCU list. A lot of that has to do with the visuals. I thought the visual effects, the CGI, was very unpolished in that film. I thought the green screen use was pretty heavy and pretty noticeable. And I thought the action sequences near the end of the film looked like a cutscene from a video game. It just didn't look like I was watching real people. And I'm happy to say that this film actually looked like they increased the budget or got some different visual effects artists, because I really don't have too many complaints about the directing and the visual sort of style in this film. Beyond like what is normal in the MCU. So at this point, there's like an MCU aesthetic. It's noticed, like you can tell, or at least I can tell, when there's green screen involved. It's never like bad, but you can tell when they're not like on a real set. You can tell when it's just like a computer image behind them. And there's instances of that in this film as well, but not to the degree of the first one. And along those lines, I thought the action sequences in this film were really well done. I thought the CGI and the visual effects overall looked a lot better. I also thought the like what's in frame is way more aesthetically pleasing than the first one. There's some really beautiful like scenery shots in this film. Just the cinematography I thought was really well done, and some of the camera movements, there's a little bit more dynamic camera movements, not just in the action sequences, but just throughout the film in general, which again, that's a tribute to Ryan Coogler and his directing. So my main complaints that I had from the first Black Panther were addressed in this film, which overall contributed to a much better viewing experience for me. In the end, though, what really sold this film for me were the performances by the actors and the character work. The acting in this movie, I think, is the best I've seen in the MCU in a long time, maybe even ever, if I'm being totally honest. And you can tell that the performances in this film are informed by the actor's real life grief and mourning of Chadwick Boseman, because the story is in the movie is essentially the same as what happened in real life. And you can tell that the actors really channel that into their performances. Angela Bassett, who's been a queen of acting for a long time, is phenomenal in this movie. Denai Guerrera is phenomenal as well. They have a scene in this film that I think may be some of the best acting I've seen in a long time in a movie. It was really powerful and really riveting. Winston Duke as M'Baku has been more of a comedic relief character throughout the MCU so far, and he has some jokes in this film as well, but you can really tell that he is channeling, like he's a critical component to this film. But the overall star is Letitia Wright. She, as Shuri, is who I would call the main character of this movie. And she goes through a pretty similar story to what T'Challa did in the first film. So, a strength I thought of the first movie was the kind of inner conflict of T'Challa. He's trying to figure out what sort of king and ruler he's going to be. He's learning about past mistakes of his father, while also trying to keep with tradition of Wakanda, while also just trying to be his own person. And Shuri is kind of put in the same position in this film with the passing of her brother. Her as the princess is kind of elevated in terms of profile, so she has to figure out what kind of human being she's going to be as a representative of Wakanda now that she's more in the limelight. There is also a theme that they touch on a little bit that I would have liked to have seen a little bit more. So Shuri is obviously a very scientifically intelligent human being. And Wakanda is this super traditional, steeped in faith country that is very tradition based, and Shuri kind of struggles with that as she's dealing with the grief. Like, she's struggling to reconcile her scientific mind with like her traditional mind. They do touch on that a couple times. I think it would have been cool to have seen them dive a little bit deeper. But her performance is phenomenal. The acting across the board, every single character is likable in this film. All of the performances I don't think could have been any better. So what really stood this movie apart and what really made it an enjoyable experience for me was the performances of the actors. Yeah, guys, in the end, this movie I think had the most responsibilities handed to it than any MCU movie so far. And for the most part, I think it handled all of those responsibilities really well. Again, the only slight issue was it was a little bit long. With all of these responsibilities that you're juggling, focus can sometimes get lost throughout the film at different points. You emphasize one component, and then another component maybe goes by the wayside for a little bit. So it can be a balancing act. And again, that's not the film's fault. That's not Ryan Coogler's fault. It really is just the hand they were dealt with the really unfortunate, tragic passing of Chadwick Boseman. But I have never been the biggest fan of the first Black Panther. I've said this on my channel before. I had some pretty significant issues with it, but this film I enjoyed infinitely more. This film will probably make it on my top 10 films at the end of the year. It's a beautiful film. It's an amazing tribute to an amazing person, an amazing actor, and an amazing character. It's beautiful in the sense that it's a nice movie to look at. The cinematography is great, and it helps set up a couple of properties down the line without feeling like they were shoehorned in. And the performances are just some of the best that I've seen in a long time. So if you enjoyed the first Black Panther, I think you'll enjoy this one. I would encourage you to see it. It's just a really beautiful film. All right, so Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. Have you seen it? If so, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and be sure to stay tuned for more.